Welcome to Please Me, the podcast bringing you bold conversations and big clit energy. I'm Eve, your host, on a journey from trauma to sexual liberation. Join me and my guests as we dive into conversations around orgasm equality, self-love, body positivity, and essential sexual education. Let's reclaim pleasure and close the orgasm gap, one empowering conversation at a time. Last week, I interviewed Amita Sharma, the creator of Nourish Doc, which is an online resource to help women navigate their lifelong hormonal changes. You can find my archived video episodes on Patreon. I'm excited to share that I placed third in the semifinals of the Fab Over 40 fundraiser competition. Although I didn't win it all, I saw so many people voting for me daily, and my heart is full from all the love and support I received. Thank you to my parents for their unwavering support and for Kathy Gallagher, who tirelessly voted and donated for me. Your support means the world. Please Me is for mature audiences. Sit back, relax, and surrender to the pleasure of Please Me.
There's 8 billion of us on the planet. We all have a unique sexuality, a unique ecology, and just allowing how we want to be good enough and to recognize the value in letting our own unique sexuality flourish. It's like when you let your own light shine, it lights the path for everybody.
Hello, and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex and sexual health by turning the sheets into our classroom. Today, I am so excited to bring on Jenn Wodtke to the show. She was a self-proclaimed virgin until she was 25, and she wrote a book called Touchless Orgasm. And now she is a pleasure and touchless orgasm coach, and I am so excited to welcome her to the show today. Hi, Jenn. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I am so excited to hear all about this touchless orgasm, which I find fascinating and intriguing. And I would love for you to just define it for us here.
It is essentially the ability to experience pleasure and orgasm from the inside out without any masturbation or self-stimulation or stimulation from a partner. It's really about using the energy and pleasure that we already have alive inside of us for pleasure and orgasm.
I love that. I was just at a podcast convention last weekend called Afros and Audio for the BIPOC community. And I had a t-shirt on that said orgasm equality on it. And I love wearing t-shirts like that to these kind of events because people like that are interested in learning about something that I talk about will be attracted to me. And then those that are not interested will be automatically repelled. So it weeds people out. But this one man walked up to me, looked at my t-shirt, and stood there for about 30 seconds without moving and said, "I just had an orgasm."
Nice.
And I started cracking up and I was like, I wonder if he actually really did have a touchless orgasm or if he was just kidding around. But it was just a really funny thing that happened. And I thought I'd just bring it up here because it is what I envision as being a touchless orgasm. You're just like still and then suddenly, oh, there it goes, but maybe not. So can you like explain a little bit more of how that works? Because I know that when I have an orgasm, I'm very vocal and there's lots of movement.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever had a touchless orgasm standing in front of strangers in the middle of the day. Not quite. Yeah, the key elements are getting in touch with our activated mind. So using our mind, it's the biggest sex organ, is really true. And then we need to build up our body sensitivity to our sensations. A lot of us living in this sex negative society have become numbed to some of what's happening inside of our bodies. And then you combine the body and the mind with pleasure building tools, and then you can have this experience where you experience pleasure and up to and including orgasm if you desire. I always want to say, I realize that touchless orgasm sounds really gimmicky and it can feel like, oh God, it's another sexual act, sexual tool I need to be able to perform, add to the list. And I want everybody listening to know that this is merely a tool in your toolbox, right? So you don't have to take it all the way to orgasm if that feels too much or it takes too long or you just don't have the energy to take it that far. if you can still experience touchless pleasure, like it's amazing, right? And I've found my own experience with it, it's just a different flavor of pleasure, right? Like it's all lovely and wonderful to have orgasms from your vibrator or your hand or something that a partner is doing to you. Like you'll pry those things from my cold dead hands when I'm in the ground. Like I love all of that. But there's something that feels so different when instead I just turn my attention inward and what's alive inside of me right now? What pleasure is available to me right now? And can I amplify that? Can I take that pleasure and like just let it flow? And once you learn how to do that, like I find your whole world opens up. And like I said, the flavor is different. Like for me, it's like this sort of just last week I had a session and it was like giggling, bubbly, like sort of pleasure bubbling up as opposed to like this loud clitoris orgasm. I was laughing the whole time and it felt like all I can say is bubbles. It felt like these bubbles just like rising up out of my pussy and kind of just like, this is amazing. And I didn't go to orgasm that day, which is totally fine. You don't have to go to orgasm if you don't want to or if it feels too much for your life at that moment. But like the ability to just go inside yourself and be like, ooh, what do I feel? And I find too, once you learn how to connect with that pleasure, like you can do it at any time. Like I'm sitting here at my desk, I guess not quite in the dark, but it's dark out. It's super early here in Tokyo. And it's if I just use my mind and put my awareness, like I can feel like, pleasure is still a little bit sleepy, but I'm like, I can feel that it's there. And I can feel that I can ramp it up if I want to. And then once we learn how to do that, we can take it into partnered sex. We can let our partners in on the fun as well.
Yes, absolutely. Like you said, it's another tool, right, in your tool belt. And a lot of times it can sound like very overwhelming. Oh, there's this kind of orgasm, there's that kind of orgasm. I have to master this, I have to master that. No, it's just something that you can use to enhance what you're already doing. And you mentioned our society can numb us. And you mentioned to me before that you felt your sexuality was very numbed as a young person. And I'd love to hear more about why you feel that was the case and how you were able to break free from that numbness and embrace your pleasure.
Yeah, I didn't come to that realization until much, much later. I actually very clearly remember when I first started searching out more sexuality resources, wanting to develop my pleasure. I came across a coach who was like, everybody's numb. And I was like, I'm not numb. I'm a sexually liberated, open woman. And then as I started to like really learn what was happening in my body and really started to play with the pleasure that was available, and reach these new pleasure heights, I look back and I was like, "Oh yeah, I had cut off a lot of sensation." And I think there's a couple major things at play there. I think fundamentally, we don't live in a society that is really safe for us to express sexually, right? So we get, especially as women, we get all these messages from our parents, church, media, our school friends, on and on about how our bodies need to look. And if you're not at home in your body or you feel shame around how your body looks, like that starts cutting things off immediately, right? And so our brain creates all these pathways and specific pathways that get us to pleasure in the one or two or very few ways that it deems safe. And so that becomes almost like a rut, right? And we take that path over and over again. And we've numbed down all the feelings around our sexuality of, if I behave outside of these sexual norms, I'm going to be called a slut. I might be ostracized by my friends. I might be kicked out of my church and on. So everything just shuts off. And we create this narrow pathway for pleasure. And once you decide to start rewriting that and you want to broaden how you can experience pleasure, then so much more of your body comes online. And that was my experience. It's like when I started realizing there's more for me, like I can orgasm in different ways. And initially I started just playing with different vibrators and it was like, oh my God. And that's when that grew. The great thing is that our pleasure is so responsive to being trained almost, and it's responsive to practice. So the more I decided, no, I want to experience all the pleasure. And we all have infinite pleasure available to us. And once I started working inside of my sexuality and pleasure, and I was like, oh my God, like, what else is there? There's so much I can experience. And that helped me grow. And the constant working in pleasure helped rewrite some of that numbness, almost like moving the numbness out of the way so that I could experience all of the pleasure that was out there. And so that's where the continued work with touchless orgasm and pleasure for me really started. Is I want to keep doing this. I want to have my pleasure like at my fingertips, which now it is. Whereas back when I first started masturbating and having sex, like it was not at my fingertips metaphorically. Like it took work to get there.
It really does. It's a practice just like any other. And you have to practice to make perfect. And you're never going to be perfect, but you're going to be able to add layers of pleasure to what you already have. And I always say that like the entire body is an erogenous zone, not just the genitals. So pay attention to the entire body, because even gently pulling your hair, rubbing your scalp can be really a turn on. And so really exploring is so key. And I would love to hear about your very first experience with your touchless orgasm and how that happened for you. Because I know for me, I have almost had orgasms in my sleep, but for some reason I can never bring it to the end. And it's so sexually frustrating when I wake up. And I actually interviewed a dream expert. Her name is Debbie Spector Wiseman, and she was on the show and she was trying to like explain to me how I can go back and lucid dream and go back and try to change the narrative of my dreams, which I thought was so fascinating and definitely something that is a hashtag goal. But now my new hashtag goal is touchless orgasm. So I would love to hear your first experience and how you brought in that.
I first had a touchless orgasm in my sleep in my early 20s, and I haven't had many in my sleep, probably less than 10 my whole life. And our sex education, I grew up in Canada, was such that I think I learned about the clitoris from Cosmo magazine. Like women's pleasure was not discussed in any of the education I received. It was just not relevant. And so I had been taught, though, that men had wet dreams and, spontaneous erections, but there was no context for women having experienced that. So that when I woke up and was like, oh my God, like what happened? Like my whole body was just vibrating. And it was a very deep, I think it was a very deep, full body kind of orgasm. But when I talked about it to my friends, because I had no context for this, none of them had experienced it either. And I went, I'll take it. I was like, this was a great experience, but I just left it. There was nobody really knew what I was talking about. And then as I proceeded to get more directed and official education about pleasure and becoming a sex coach, that popped up. And I just became over time really convinced that if my body could do this sleep, like that for me was the big key, is like my body can do this. It was sleeping, right. So it was unconscious, like I wasn't in control of it, but my body was capable of experiencing and creating this orgasm without any external stimulation. And that blew my mind. And I just became convinced that if I could find the key or the tools or the secret, I could flip it from a sleeping experience to a waking one that I could control. But I didn't know how to do it. I had no idea how to do that. Because even in my formal sex education, I did a little bit of graduate studies in San Francisco, didn't complete for a variety of reasons. But there wasn't enough conversation about pleasure. And finally, a couple years ago, when I got my sex coaching certification, part of that process was we had to do a lot of practices and tools on ourselves. And that's when everything started to really shift. I was like, oh, I'm doing these practices to release some of the things that cause that numbness. Like I was releasing wounding from my childhood and some of the microaggressions we get in our society around sex. As I was releasing all of that and doing pleasure tools, I was like, I'm on the right track. I was like, I'm getting closer. There's the key is nearby somewhere. And then I went on a retreat as part of this training. And I'm in a room full of 80 women. We're being guided through a pleasure practice in these big groups. And I'm on my yoga mat and I'm like, oh my God, it's happening. Like, I'm going to come in a room full of 80 women. And I was like, and then the session ended. So it didn't happen. I was like, I totally get that frustration you were mentioning earlier. I was like, I just needed 10 more minutes. So I had a couple sessions like that week. So I went home and I was like, it is real. I knew it. I knew that. Okay, I've got the tools. So I went back home to see if I could replicate that experience because there really was something about being in that energy, like just all that female sexual energy that I knew was helping me get closer to the experience. So I wanted to make sure that I could do it on my own, just me on my living room floor. And the same thing happened. Like it started bubbling up and I was like, oh my God, I can do this by myself. So that was definitely like a angel singing moment. And then I went to work pulling out all of the things that needed to be in place so that I could start teaching it to others. And I ran a beta course a couple times and was like, this can be taught. People can learn how to do this if they want to.
Amazing. I'm so fascinated by this because this is something that I definitely rely on tools. And for me, it's a vibrator and I must have a vibrator to have an orgasm. I can't do it with my hands. I've never done it with my mind, not even in my dreams. And so it's something that I'm really intrigued by. Let's talk about what causes people to impede pleasure. And I'm thinking specifically about our inner critic, right? And
Oh,
and you talked about how you had to strip away the shame and strip away the societal norms and strip away the parental this and the religion that and all of that and throw it out the window. And I would love to just like briefly talk about the inner critic because I think that really does impede a lot of people from really experiencing and enjoying pleasure like to the fullest.
oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I want people to realize too. The actual process of touchless orgasm and pleasure is straightforward, right? It's like a sensitized body, activated mind, and then pleasure building tools, which are not complicated. And so the actual framework of it is not at all complicated, but where people struggle, or not struggle even, but what can be really challenging is that, especially because we're not using those vibrators, we're relying on our mind. Everything that's in the way that we've taken on comes up when people start working through this process. So, it is for things like that religious shame, like good girls don't enjoy sex, right? Or my body's too, and then fill in the blank, my body's too big, too small, too whatever to have this pleasure. Or that inner critic starts popping up. Mine's been popping up lately a lot. Even though I know how to get her under control, she's like, life sucks these days. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. What's going on? A big part of being successful with touchless pleasure and orgasm is having the tools to open up to your wounding. We have to let those wounds express. I have a Touchless Orgasm book. There's also a course. We do a lot of things to let all of the emotions, and there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of shame that we've really packed down to keep ourselves safe, right? And that's one of the really main keys. We have to feel safe to have these experiences. To feel that safety, sometimes we have to let that shame out. And that can be really difficult to let the shame out, let whatever our inner critic is telling us, let it out and let it all liberate. And once we get all that gunk out of the way, then we have a much easier time connecting with the pleasure and directing it. And so there's a video I made and put up on my YouTube. One of my favorite ways to deal with the inner critic and that I use all the time is I specifically with the example of shame. It's a shamegasm. So you go down and Like right now, my inner critic is screaming at me because of finances, some financial decisions and things that I've made. So the shame monster comes up and she's like, you should have more money saved. You should have done this. You should have made this financial choice. You shouldn't have saved your house. Like, you're worthless because you don't have X amount of dollars in the bank. So what I do is, instead of, and I think what a lot of us do with the inner critic, our instinct is to silence, right? But when we silence something and not let it express, that's how we start building up that numbness, right? Because we shove it down, we shove it down, we shove it down, and then we never feel those emotions. And that, again, is one of the scary things about doing the work, is we have to feel everything to get to the pleasure. So instead of telling that inner critic, that shame monster, to shut up, I'm like, okay, so we don't have as much money as whatever the magical number is. We don't have that number. Am I worthless? Okay, maybe I'm worthless. So I let that shame like just open it up, let it run its course. And then in this case, I am using a vibrator for this exercise. And then I flip into pleasure, right? I start self-pleasuring and let myself feel good for a few minutes. And then I flip back to the shame. And so I let the shame run again, let it say all the things. And then I flip back into self-pleasure. So the idea is, we want to train our mind and our body to understand that we can feel all of those emotions, that everything that inner critic is talking about. I'm too fat. I don't have enough money. I'm worthless. I don't have a partner, whatever. That can exist inside of us along with the pleasure. They are not mutually exclusive. And we deserve pleasure, period. No matter what else is happening inside of our emotional life, inside of our career, inside of our relationship, no matter what, those parts can coexist. And then eventually you get to the point where you have this shamegasm, right? And that helps to liberate those emotions. And you can do it with shame, you could do it with jealousy, you could do it with rage, right? And that is one of my favorite tools, just turn that off. Because, like I said, if you just tell it to shut up, it doesn't shut up. So we let it speak, and then we put it in its place, and we allow it to coexist with the pleasure. That's one of my favorite tools, although there are other things we do inside of the book and inside of the course. Because what works best for one person to shut off the inner critic or turn down the inner critic, at least, might not be somebody else's favorite, but there's lots of other things that we can do. But that's my personal favorite. I'm just gonna masturbate this shame monster to silence and then get on with my day, right?
I love that tool so much. I think it's such a great tool to use for so many different things. Like you said, it could be used for the inner critic, it could be used for shame, for rage, for anger, for whatever it may be. But using orgasm, pleasure, as a tool is such a beautiful idea, because it brings you your endorphins, all of those feel good chemicals are released in your body, and you're allowing yourself the emotional release of whatever the feelings are that are negative, and you're layering it with like positive feelings and also biochemical feelings of feeling good, and realizing that you are not those negative feelings. You are so much more. So what a great tool to use in so many different aspects of your life. I love that tool. It's such a great idea. Taylor Sparks has been my guest on Please Me twice, and during our last show, we created a curated store of my very favorite sex toys, lubes, and sexy accoutrements. These all-natural products are not only game changers to add some spice to the bedroom, but also safe to use on all your sensitive bits. Remember, lube is for everyone, and sex toys are to be enjoyed solo or with a partner, so don't be shy and go treat yourself to a new fun and sexy toy or two. See the show notes for the link to the store. Happy shopping. It brings me to another question, because really pleasure can be such a high level experience, and it can be very basic and very like in your body, but it also could be, like connecting you to the infinite. And so I want to ask you, what do you think the role of spirituality is in pleasure?
I love that question. I began working on my pleasure simply because I wanted to have more pleasure. And over time, I've come to really realize that our pleasure is a portal into ourselves, into the divine. And at this point in my journey, I'm not sure that pleasure and spirituality can be separated. I think they're just so intertwined and absolutely connect to the divine. My favorite story about this from my own personal experience, and I know I've been talking a lot about practice, and I do pleasure practices, but sometimes like sit down and I just want to rub one out. It's not always this, I'm going to have a practice and I'm going to do this. Sometimes it's just, I want an orgasm. So that's what I was doing one day a couple years ago. And at orgasm, completely unbidden, out of nowhere, popped into my head, I forgive. And then it was a specific person. And I was like, no, I don't. I don't forgive that person. But then I sat with it for a moment and I was like, damn it, it is true. I do forgive them. And it was really, that was another interesting turning point for me, the realization that our pleasure can be liberating. It can liberate us from a lot of wounding and history. And if we listen to some of the messages that we get during pleasure that feel spiritual, I think that helps really guide us into deeper relationship with ourselves and others. Yeah, I was so mad. I was so mad. I guess I do forgive him.
Wow. That is really an interesting story. And I can see how, like you said, it can be used to release anger and it can be used to release shame, et cetera, et cetera. But that's a whole nother level that came to you when you were not even expecting it. When you do forgive, it allows you to move on from that pain and put it behind you. And it's more for you than for the person that you're forgiving. And so maybe your body was like, I require all my pleasure, and this is holding me back somehow. And so I need to release this in order to completely be able to experience all the pleasure that I deserve. And so I can relate to that because there have been people that I've had to forgive in the past that for many years I was holding on to that. I will never forgive you till the day I die, right? But when you do release that, it's such a transformative thing to allow you to move forward in a more positive light and not hold on to all that negative baggage.
And I think when we forgive, I think maybe 90% of it is toward the actual person or the situation. But I think there's 10% of it that is forgiving something inside of us. So that act of forgiveness, it helps us heal because we've forgiven ourselves too. So that helps us transcend and, like you said, transform.
Yes, exactly. And forgiving yourself is so key too. And holding on to something, even if you're not really thinking about it in terms of it being internalized, you're internalizing it by holding on to it. Forgiveness can allow you to just open up to so many other different possibilities. So I love that you shared that experience. So, besides quieting the internal critic, what other common issues can get in the way of our pleasure?
I think a lot of us have conditioning and so beliefs about when it's acceptable to experience pleasure, be it I must be in a married relationship, or I must be in love with a person, or nice women don't have more than X amount of partners. There's so much that we take on. So it's really, there's something that has to happen where we have to allow all of that to express so that we can find out what we truly believe. And I think that's one of the keys. Like all of that gunk that we take on can really bury our own beliefs. So we have to find what we truly deep within ourselves believe is true around sex and pleasure. And then once we uncover that, we can start living that, right? So that's a big piece of it, is getting everything that's, I feel like it's almost been thrown into a well, right? So we got to like dig all of that crap out so we can see the water that is our own beliefs and our own desires, and really just acknowledging that whoever we are, there's 8 billion of us on the planet. We all have a unique sexuality, a unique ecology, and just allowing how we want to be good enough and to recognize the value in letting our own unique sexuality flourish. It's like when you let your own light shine, it lights the path for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. And sharing our stories is so important. So I definitely appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing yours and how you have developed this practice for yourself and how you are also sharing it with the world. So thank you for that. And I want to jump into our role play now, because we're at that time in the show where I want to move on to that. And so we talked about maybe you being my pleasure coach today.
Yeah.
And I am going to ask you some questions. So why don't we jump into that?
Yeah.
Action.
Sounds good.
So Jenn, I am so excited for you to help me, because I feel like this preconceived idea that I've had in my mind from the time that I was first introduced to spoken word practically has been in my mind, and I feel like it's holding me back. And that is that God is a man, right? And when you think about that and you're conditioned as a child to believe that God is a man, right? It makes you feel like you're less than as a woman. And so I feel like that is inhibiting me in some ways, and would love for you to give me some tips on what I can do to release that, and to, because I want to be in touch with my divine feminine.
Yeah. I could take you through a little practice to demonstrate what you can do to start rewriting and rewiring this. And then you can go deeper when you're at home and have more time and more privacy. You can go deeper with this. How does that sound?
Sounds great. I'm excited.
Okay. I'll invite you to close your eyes if that feels safe and comfortable.
Okay.
And then just take a few deep breaths, letting your mind relax, letting your body relax. Any thoughts that pop up, just going to collect those, put them in a box, put it off to the side. You can collect those thoughts later if you like. I'm just going to invite you to visualize yourself walking upon a beautiful beach at night. The moon is out. You can feel the water lapping at your toes, the sand squishing under your feet. Feeling yourself completely safe and comfortable. This is your beach. As you walk along, the soft breeze caresses your skin. You can smell the tang of salts in your nose and on your tongue. And as you walk, you hear some sounds in the distance. You follow these sounds. And further down on the beach, you come to a group of women. And as soon as they see you, they welcome you with open arms. They invite you to join them. And you realize they are on this beach. They have a bonfire lit, and they are worshiping their goddess. So they take you into their ritual, and you see the goddess represented by one of the clan. She's standing slightly apart from the crowd, and the women are dancing around her. You see all bodies there, Women of all ages, all skin colors, dancing, completely filled with joy, and they invite you to join. And you join them in this dance around the fire, celebration of the goddess. And as you move and dance and yell and sing with these women, you feel the goddess inside of you coming alive. And as their guest, they invite you to take a seat of honor, which you do. And then the goddess moves toward, you can see her, this ethereal being in the form of a woman coming to you. And you can feel inside of you all of her wisdom, that she knows the truth of the universe. And she comes and she wraps her arms around you, offering you all of her love, all of her divinity. And she begins to speak truth to you, inviting you to share out loud these truths that she speaks to you.
And end scene.
Sorry.
Were we gonna go on? I said end scene.
Yeah. So that's an example of of course, this is really truncated, but
Right.
that is an example of sort of one of the tools that I use specifically for your question about religious shame. So it really is about taking women into this reality where they receive divine guidance and wisdom from women. So there's a process, right, where to be like, okay, so what did you hear? And we would do, before we would get into this, we would unwind what ways have you been spiritually disempowered by only being in a world where men are priests and what have you.
Right,
so we would look at that, and then we would go into something similar to this exercise where it's, okay, what do these wise women teach you, these goddesses? And then we would take a look at what the differences between how you were raised and how what you would hear from women. And then we would do further work on almost like encoding the new beliefs from women into your system. We would work to make those like feel real in your body. So that's a little example of how we would overwrite that.
Amazing. And obviously it's a process, so we can't do it all in a few minutes, but it is a good, like, nice little taste of something that you might do with a client. And I love how you expanded on that as to what you would add to it before and after as well, because obviously these things take time, but the visualization was really beautiful. And I could envision myself walking on that beach and coming to this group of women. And I saw them that they had candles and they had like sound healing bowls, and they had, so like I just had this like whole idea of what sorts of things were happening there. And it was really beautiful and very peaceful. And yes, connecting yourself to divinity, especially during sensuality and sexuality, is a beautiful practice because it just brings that ability to connect with the other person and with your own divinity to a whole nother level. So thank you for that beautiful practice. I want to make sure that my listeners can find you. Where can we find you?
Yeah, I'm under my name. My website, my socials are under my name. So Jenn with 2 N's. And then Wodtke, Wodtke, should be popping up there. On my website, you can get my book, Touchless Orgasm, for $5. Gives you all of the tools for you to get started on touchless orgasm and hands-free pleasure practices. And the other thing I'm super, super excited about, I am at the end of January, I don't have the dates right in front of me. Haven't looked at it in a while. January 25th to the 30th, I believe.
Okay.
I am co-leading a retreat in Tulum, Mexico.
Ooh, Tulum.
Punani Power. Yeah, Punani Power. So we're going to be doing some Touchless pleasure practices. We'll be doing a little bit of yoni egg work, some sacred sexuality. My partner will partner who I'm co-leading with will be leading a new moon ritual on the beach. So there's going to be lots of beautiful feminine divine energy to really dig into and to bask into. So that's also on my website. So check it out. It's going to be a fabulous 5 days. I cannot wait for that.
Sounds amazing. And Mexico is one of my favorite places. It's such a spiritual place too. And the fact that you're having it in Tulum, which has so much ancient history there, and just it's going to be really beautiful. Good luck with that, and check that out there. And I want to make sure that people can find me as well. pleaseme.online. And if you love this episode as much as I loved recording it with Jenn, please pick up your phone right now and copy the link and send it to someone who you think might also be interested in this show. That is how podcasts grow, by sharing. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And please also, after listening to the show, please leave a review, because that is how we can grow. And so I appreciate all of my listeners out there. And again, thank you so much for being on the show today, Jenn.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
It was. And until next time, bye-bye. For ad-free listening, exclusive bonus episodes, Eve's library of archived webinars, and early access to new releases of Please Me, become a monthly supporter on Patreon. Simply open the Patreon app on your phone, search for Please Me, and subscribe today for premium content and more. Cheers to finding your pleasure and big clit energy.